Well, hello there, my lovelies. Welcome to Erica's Magical Projects. I'm Erica, and I'm trying to bring more magic into my life every week by a selection of different projects. Join me this week as I wash some yarn in the beautiful sunshine. Spinning yarn is lots of fun, but after a while it starts building up and it really needs to go on to the next process. The next part of the yarn process is to wash it, partly to wash the yarn, but also to set the twist. Now, I've been waiting all year for some beautiful May sunshine so I can get that yarn out onto the line and get it nice and dry. Not only do you set the twist when you wash the yarn, but you also felt the wool a little bit so that it gives the yarn a little bit more structure and a little bit more solidity. But when you're doing this, there's always a risk that you're going to over-felt the yarn and end up with a horrible kind of creature like this. This is the kind of thing that can happen if you don't wash your yarn properly. These are all beautiful skeins of wool until I put them in too hot or too spinny or something and they've ended up as like little creatures. Anyway, I'm not going to waste it because I think it's quite a cool little funky art thing, so this hangs up in my house. Little like sea anemone things. When you take the yarn off the niddy noddy, it's a beautiful skein like this. Oh. This is how you make it into a skein. You twist it round and then ply it back onto itself and wibble it around a bit. And that is how you would buy a skein of hand spun yarn in your local yarn shop. But before it gets to being sold, it needs to be washed. I have 3 skeins of alpaca to wash. I'm hoping to make these into a weaving. This is some alpaca and merino mix. In future videos, I'll be getting out my antique loom. This lovely raspberry coloured yarn is going to be making some kind of weaving. I really kind of want a shawl out of this, some kind of like coat thing. This yarn is called Air. It's part of a series of yarns that I've spun that I want to weave into a mat that I sit on when I'm calling in the elements. It's lovely and sparkly. This yarn has got an interesting construction. It's got 4 plies and the colour changes gradually through the different plies. It's called a hosier cable, something like that. This yarn is a very bobbly, knobbly yarn. Now, this is exactly the kind of yarn that I'm going to worry that it's going to lose this lovely texture while going through the washing process. There's a little bit too much twist in this, so it really needs blocking. Here's another little knobbly bobbly one. I just had a little sample of this merino and lovely sparkly blue fluff and I just spun it up into a super coil. Here's a jumbo yarn. This is one of my favourites that I've made recently. It's super pink and sparkly and unicorny. Oh, it's lovely. Now what will happen is that these fluffy bobbly bits will felt up a little bit and become more sturdy. This yarn has a gradual colour change going through it from green to blue. I often like to do several art bats at a time of the same mix and then make an art yarn with some of it and a 2-ply with the rest of it to be worked together. I envisage these could be woven together to make an interesting texture but with the same colourway. Look at them together. I've done the same thing here with this purple yarn. This one is the art yarn and this is the 2-ply. And finally, I've got this piece of fabric that needs to be washed and set. It's only the second piece of weaving I've ever done, and I did it on a 100-year-old loom, which I will get out and show you in further months. It's a combination of commercial threads in the warp, and in the weft, it's my hand-spun rare breed hand-spun yarn. So I'm not sure how that's going to work when the yarn starts felting. It might ruin it. I don't know. Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. Let's wash some yarn. So this is just my way of washing yarn and by no means the definitive way. Everybody has their own method. I've done a lot of yarn washing and this is what I've come up with. That is one drop of washing liquid. I'm going to go for a second drop. That's it, that's all you need. Now I'm going to start off with some boiling water from the kettle. Now that's far too hot. That will just felt everything. It'll ruin it. Too hot. Give it a stir. Some cold water now. it a little stir. Okay, that's just off the boil. I'd say that was probably about 70 degrees. I'm adding yarns that are the same colours so that if some of the dye leaks out of them, it doesn't really ruin them. I'm being a bit bold actually, some of these are a bit contrasting. I could ruin this, I could easily ruin this. Hubble bubble, toil and trouble. It looks like yarn soup. I'm just pressing it slightly. This is what's going to give it the slight feltiness, this motion. Not too much though, stop now. Okay yarn, I am now going to leave you for about 20 minutes. Now a good rinse with cold water. A couple of these. Rinse until the water runs clear. Now you can see the yarn is starting to change and felt. These will fluff back up again once they've started to dry. To spin the water out, you can use a washing machine. Just use the spin cycle and a gentle one. I used 800 here. Before the yarn is hung out, it needs to be whacked. This is to evenly distribute the twist along all of the yarn. It's quite noisy. This is the part of the process where you can see if the yarns have survived. This one, unfortunately, the core string has snapped. You can see here all of the yarns have fluffed up beautifully and kept their texture. The next part of the process is to block the yarn. This means to keep it straight while it's drying. I use a couple of coat hangers and some rocks in a bag. This means the yarn will be really straight and nice to use. Now to do it all again, with a second knot of yarn, and a third. I've spent the week washing and scrubbing and drying and whacking, and eventually the weather has turned, and so I've brought all my yarns inside onto this dryer just to finish. They've been nicely stretched, so they only really need a little bit of finishing, and I think now, after a week, they're finally done. Everything survived apart from this one, which lost a little bit of its integrity. As you can see, it's just kind of come a little bit undone. But that's not to worry at all, because I get to keep this one, and you will see one of these in some kind of crazy weavings I shall make later on in the year. And most pleasingly to me, this has kind of taken on a little bit of an interesting texture as it's washed. It's kind of felted a little bit this way, but not that way, because these acrylic strands won't felt. And it's given it a little bit of a kind of stretchiness in this direction. I was going to make this into something, but now I'm just kind of thinking I will just wear it. So now it's time to tidy all the yarns away, to make them into skeins, and to put them away for safekeeping, away from the naughty moths. There are a lot of moths this time of year. Be careful of moths. That's the important bit, to keep the moths out. There we go, that's nice and safe now from the moths and ready to go into a drawer for the next part of the process, which is to label the ones that I'm going to sell and to make them all presentable for the market. Thank you for joining me this week for a very labour-intensive part of the yarn making process. It doesn't seem like an important part, but washing a yarn is almost the most important part of the process, because instead of ending up with beautiful bobbles and spirals and textures like this, if it goes wrong, you could end up with little balls of nothing like this. Anyway, this didn't happen to me this time, and I got most of my lovely yarn back. Join me next week as I make some yarn toys to sell at my local craft fair, and just to give you a little sneak peek of what's going. Until then, remember, everything handmade is magical.